We will no longer surrender this country or its people to the false song of globalism. The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
What do Ayn Rand, Bernie Sanders, and the New York Stock Exchange have in common? They're all liberal. Now wait, before you start to type, what about Trump and Mitch McConnell and my 85-year-old grandparents? Well, just wait. I'll get there. But first, let's take a quick dive into liberalism, capitalism, and the failure of globalization. You hear the word liberal and immediately think about Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and roughly 50% of all Americans. But maybe we should take a step back and look at the history of the word liberal, where it comes from, and how it's changed so much since then. During the 2004 presidential campaign season, George Bush claimed that his opponent, John Kerry, was a perfect example of liberalism because of his platform based on raising taxes and increasing bureaucracy. But in reality, raising taxes and increasing bureaucracy couldn't be further from its origins. Liberal, coming from the root liber, means free in Latin. The term liberal came to be during the Enlightenment, when political philosopher John Locke proposed an unalienable right to private property and freedom from persecution from the government. Liberalism then evolved when Scottish economist Adam Smith influenced the philosophy with the concept of open and free markets, believing that the invisible hand of the free market will always adapt to the citizens' needs. So, let's quickly round up the original definition of the word liberal. A political philosophy that believes in private property, freedom from the government, and open and free markets. Now that doesn't sound at all antithetical to what your typical conservative or libertarian would believe in today. Liberalism changed forever when President Roosevelt, the New Deal one, not the disappears for months at a time to go hunt bears one, announced arguably the largest and most significant government reform since the 13th and 14th Amendment. The New Deal. The New Deal implemented sweeping reform to government safety net programs. From Social Security to providing hundreds of thousands of jobs for unemployed Americans, President Roosevelt permanently changed the definition of a liberal from someone who desires freedom to someone who supports government intervention. Over time, liberalism, and by extension Democrats, began to adopt values that more accurately align them with what you'd expect the modern liberal to have today. Think about the Civil Rights Act, LGBTQ equality, pacifism, environmentalism, and avocado toast. Now fast forward to the mid-1990s and let's meet a man named Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is partly responsible for a new split in the Democratic Party, the neoliberals. Great, another disambiguation of the word liberal. So what does this one mean? Well, luckily it's basically just a mix of the classical liberalism and modern liberalism. This means a neoliberal will typically embrace the social aspects of liberalism like racial equality and LGBTQ equality, but overwhelmingly reject government intervention in the free market. Globalization is a term used to describe the shift from countries relying on their own resources and technology to specializing and working with other countries to move forward as a global community. Globalization is marked with rapid technological and industrial growth. Globalism relies on a free and open market to facilitate trade between countries. So, what's the problem with countries working together to move forward economically, socially, and technologically? Since a trademark of globalization is technological innovation, we have to look at the consequences of rapid industrialization and technological advancement. In 2016, the UN warned that nearly 2/3 of all the jobs in the developing world were at risk. Automation threatens nearly half of all jobs in America and as much as 77% of all jobs in China. This transition from mostly physical labor to robot and AI-driven labor will be extremely difficult and on an unprecedented scale. Luckily, for the United States at least, automation has already taken most of its effect, but in rural and developing countries, the government is not prepared to deal with the loss of revenue from all those lost jobs. Those governments will be unable to bear the weight of all their citizens when they are no longer able to afford to maintain roads, pay teachers or law enforcement, or adequately care for their poor. This ties into the failure of neoliberalism. Neoliberals are, for the most part, in favor of automation because it allows the free market to continue prospering. After all, why wouldn't a manufacturing plant pay a waged employee when they can replace them with a no-wage robot? This issue can only be solved by government intervention, a process in which globalists and neoliberals are opposed to. Many solutions have been proposed to help curb this issue. A few examples include requiring employers to have a certain percentage of paid humans doing work, or taxing former employers who lay off their employees more heavily to help offset the cost of caring for those out-of-work citizens. An idea that has been gaining more traction recently, in the US at least, has been the concept of universal basic income. Universal basic income is a concept that guarantees every citizen in a country a set amount of money equal to a living wage, so that they are not forced to work in order to live. And in a world where they might not be able to work, universal basic income is becoming an attractive idea among critics of neoliberalism and automation. So, what do Ayn Rand, Bernie Sanders, and the New York Stock Exchange have in common? Well, they're all examples of liberalism, just at different times.
There will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better. What to do about mass unemployment? This is going to be a massive social challenge. And I think ultimately we will have to have some kind of universal basic income. I don't think we're going to have a choice.
Universal basic income.
Universal basic income. I think it's going to be necessary.
So it means that unemployed people will be paid across the globe.
Yeah.
Because there is no job, machine, robot is taking over.
That's simply and I want to be clear that these are not things that I think that I wish would happen. These are simply things that I think probably will happen. And if my assessment is correct and they probably will happen, then we need to say, what are we going to do about it? And I think some kind of a universal basic income is going to be necessary. Now, the output of goods and services will be extremely high. So with automation, there will come abundance. There will be almost everything will get very cheap. I think I think we'll just end up doing a universal basic income. It's going to be necessary. The harder challenge, much harder challenge, is how do people then have meaning? Like a lot of people, they derive their meaning from their employment. So if you don't have, if you're not needed, if there's not a need for your labor, how do you, what's the meaning? Do you have meaning? Do you feel useless? That's a much harder problem to deal with.